Hey guys, it's Dr. May. How are you? Today I wanted to talk about kind of a difficult topic, shame. Okay, and I know a lot of us struggle with shame, and it could really get in the way of living our best life. So I wanted to go over that in greater detail today, and give us some tools for building shame resilience and moving past it. Okay, let's get this up for us. Go. So I'm calling it from shame to self-acceptance, right? So it's a bit of a journey you have to make sometimes, right? Because if we're living our life dripping in shame, we have to crawl our way out and work towards self-acceptance, right? All right. So let's define our topic. So what is shame? You have any ideas? I'm sure we could kind of look at the picture here and recognize that this man is probably experiencing shame. But sometimes it's hard to actually describe what shame is, right? I turned to Brene Brown, who's a really great speaker, author, shame expert, and a lot of my presentation is drawn from her work. So I would refer you to her, especially for more information. But her definition of shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we're flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So if you look at what's on that girl's back, I think it's a girl or a boy, I'm not sure. I don't want to assume gender and be wrong, but it's like we're weighed down and stooped. We're not standing tall, right? We're weighed down and hiding ourselves. We're lowering ourselves because of such painful, heavy thoughts like, I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough, or I have to be perfect. Nobody loves me, right? And the feeling that comes from it is shame, right? And because we feel there's something so wrong with us, you think, how could anyone possibly, how could we possibly be with somebody who knows all of those things about us and still be cared for anyway? So it kind of puts a gap between us and other people, okay? Um, so shame in a lot of ways is a social construct, right? So it comes from just imagining yourself through the eyes of other people, right? So if you like look at that first picture, right? So the man is sitting alone, right? But he has this invisible audience in his mind, right? So maybe it's people from his family or friends or people he's interacted with over the years that kind of become this invisible audience inside our head that's giving us negative messages about ourselves or parts of ourselves that they don't deem to be acceptable. And because those parts are not acceptable, we feel like we're not worthy of belonging, right? I heard someone also say that shame is the breaking of the interpersonal bridge, right? So look at the picture on the right. So it's almost like there's this gap between us and other people, like this invisible wall or this giant chasm that we can't cross because we feel that self-alienation that comes with shame. And it's so painful. Because as it says in the bottom, shame is an innocent emotion where it comes from the wish to be loved. So deep down, we all just really wish that people will love and accept us completely for who we are. But when we've been given messages over the years that we're not okay for who we are, we feel like we can't be loved. Or maybe we've made efforts to reach out and get that love, and they were not respected, they were invalidated, they were rejected. And it becomes so painful. And to protect ourselves, we sometimes stop trying because we just don't want to, feel that pain and rejection, right? But the good news is, although it happens between people, it's a social construct, it can also heal between people. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Okay, so a lot of times we interchangeably use these words I have up here, right? And just kind of in our everyday language. So we kind of confuse shame and guilt and humiliation and embarrassment. But there actually is a little bit of a difference, okay? So we're gonna clarify what that difference is so we could kind of expand our feeling vocabulary and be a little bit more accurate when we're describing what we're feeling, okay? So guilt versus shame, right? So guilt is when you feel like I did something wrong, right? Or I did something that was against my values and I regret that action that I did. Whereas shame goes deeper and it feels like I didn't just do something wrong. I go the step further and think I am wrong, or I didn't just make a mistake, but I'm a mistake. There's something wrong with me, right? And so it's so much deeper and more painful than guilt, right? And that's what makes shame harder to deal with, okay? Um, and actually they say that guilt is more of a positive indicator. Like if people feel guilt, sometimes they're motivated to fix the mistake. Whereas when you're shamed, you feel so paralyzed by the shame that it's hard to get yourself going and to move forward. You feel so much more stuck, okay? All right, so here's another which is which. All right, so humiliation versus embarrassment, okay? And both of these are a little bit less intense than shame, okay? So humiliation is maybe you feel like you were made to feel like there's something wrong with you by other people, but you know you didn't deserve it, okay? So let's look at the picture here on the left. So let's say the woman is Muslim, right? And she's wearing a hijab and people are, criticizing her or making her feel bad because she's Muslim. And she doesn't like being treated that way, right? She wants acceptance from people, prefer it, right? But she knows deep down that it's okay to be Muslim and I'm okay as I am, right? That she has her own religion and maybe a community of other good Muslim people that she's with. And she knows it's wrong to be treated that way, right? So that's more of humiliation. Embarrassment is the least intense of the four, okay? Because that's kind of like, let's say I trip over my shoelaces in front of a crowd of people, right? It's kind of embarrassing, but I know it doesn't mean there's something wrong with me, right? When I'm just embarrassed about it, it's like, it's a little funny, like I could laugh about it. Maybe I know, like I've seen other people trip before. I'm not the only one who gets clumsy sometimes. So it makes me feel a little, funny about it, but it's not the end of the world. And it's more passing, right? I could kind of move past the embarrassment much more quickly. Now, of course, an embarrassing situation, if taken a certain way, could turn into shame, but it doesn't have to. Okay, so does that make sense, the clarification? Okay, I hope so. Okay, so although I touched on it before, let's just clarify what shame says to us, right? So these internal, imagined audience voices gives us these negative messages, right? So it tells us like, I'm such a bad person, or I'm not good enough, or there's something wrong with me, right? And maybe I don't deserve love, right? And therefore you hide out from people and you think like, if they ever found out this negative thing about me, fill in the blank, they would never like me, right? If I only revealed that secret, the whole relationship would fall apart, right? Have you ever thought that? Other times on the flip side, if we kind of get too big for our britches, so to speak, or we, try to be too smart or too beautiful or too out there or too confident, shame might say, well, who do you think you are? Who do you think you're special? You think you're talented? Or who do you think you are? Right? So shame pulls us back, okay, and can make us feel like, like we shouldn't even try because it's like we're like phonies, okay? Like we're just that imposter syndrome kind of thing, okay? All right, so here's just some categories of thought patterns, just to put it a slightly different way. All right, so there's an individualizing thought pattern. So this idea that I'm the only one, right? So instead of recognizing that there's probably a million other people right now that are going through the same experience and have gone through the same experience, and people years ago have gone through it before, I'm not the first one, we think like we're the only one, right? And that sense of isolation can be very painful. We pathologize, right? So instead of taking our normal human characteristics as just normal human characteristics, we start to turn it into, oh God, there's something wrong with me, right? And even if you're saying, okay, well, I have a mental illness or I have an addiction, and that's not normal, okay, but it's something that a lot of people have, right? And it's part of the human experience. And trying to make it mean something bad about me as a person and my character is pathologizing, okay? Because there's always a core of me that's still enough, that's okay, despite all the other stuff that's going on. And it's reinforcing because it's like a shame spiral, a shame loop, right? So you feel like, I deserve this, right? This is not good. There's something wrong with me. I'm the only one. I deserve this bad treatment. Then I project this shame to the world, and people respond to me a certain way and they say, see, I knew that was going to happen, right? And it just kind of like perpetuates itself, okay? So that's the reinforcing part. It's also important to know, right? So instead of thinking, even there's something wrong with me just for feeling shame, there's not, because it's actually wired into us. It's something that even animals experience in some form, and it's related to a survival response, right? Ever hear of fight or flight? Okay, well, there's also ones called freeze and fold, right? And so when we're threatened, we could fight back if possible. We could run away if possible. But other times, you could submit, right? Or fold or collapse. So in these pictures, right, we're looking at, I think they're wolves. I'm not completely sure, maybe dogs. I'm not an expert in this area, right? But either way, right, we have two pictures where the dog or the wolf rolled over on his back and showed his belly, right? So that's a sign of submission in the animal world because the dog probably couldn't run away and he couldn't fight back. And so he collapsed and submitted to the alpha dog, let's say, okay, because maybe that was the safest thing to do. So sometimes the safest thing for us to do is to submit to someone who's too powerful, right? So if you're a kid and you have a powerful parent that you're relying on to take care of you, sometimes submitting to them was the best choice you had, right? Kind of making yourself small and quiet and trying to keep them happy was the best way you could think of to survive. Because you can't fight a big person. You can't run away from your home, or it wouldn't be that helpful in your survival. So the shame response helped you, right? And so when you realize that, it's like, it can kind of feel a little validating, right? That you're not doing this for nothing. You're not collapsing because there's something wrong with you. It's wired into us to do this sometimes, okay? So, and it probably was the safest choice you had, okay? So just try to take that in, try to validate that, because that's a really important insight you could take with you, okay? Okay, so let's look at our development. Okay, so there's a guy named Erik Erikson who talked about what they call psychosocial stages of development, right? So in this particular stage, right, this is the second stage that he talks about. So it's around 18 months to 3 years, so a year and a half to 3 years. So kids are getting mobile, right? They're able to walk around, run around, and so they want to explore, right? But when you're little, you don't have much impulse control yet because you're little, right? So you just see something fun or cool and you just run toward it, or you just touch this or do that, right? And you're not thinking ahead, you're not thinking about danger, right? So you're running around and you have parents to try to rein you in, right? To kind of pull you back if you go too far or you do something that could be dangerous, right? And sometimes when a parent tries to pull you back in from exploring, they do it in such a way that makes you feel shame or doubt about your comfort exploring, right? Now you feel like, oh man, I was foolish for going too far, and if the parent shames you and doesn't repair the shame, you carry that shame with you. Other times they might shame you for, an emotion you're experiencing that's not considered acceptable, or an interest you have, or a behavior you have, and you always have it with you that there's something wrong with that part of me. Okay, so this is kind of where it starts, though. It starts with the exploration and then the reining in from a parent. Okay, all right. So if it becomes healthy, this probably is more about guilt than shame, because shame makes you feel like you're bad for who you are, whereas guilt is addressing a behavior, right? So if a parent scolds you for going too far, for going in a dangerous place, for answering back, for not behaving in a socially acceptable way, and they talk about your behavior, and if you feel bad about it, they try to remind you that they still love you for you. There's still an unconditional love, even though your behavior was problematic. And if that's the case, they repair the painful, shameful feelings you had, and you realize you can survive them, that you're still loved, even though you make mistakes. And if you experience that over and over, the scolding or the telling you this thing was wrong doesn't kill you. It doesn't destroy you, right? So that kind of leads to resilience, because that's the kind of person where if you get insulted by somebody or rejected by somebody, it's not the end of the world because you've had these repair experiences from your parent, okay? But this is not the case for a lot of us, right? This is the ideal situation where shame is repaired or guilt is repaired by a parent. A lot of times it's left unrepaired and we're stuck with these negative feelings about ourselves that came from that outside feedback, okay? All right, I hope you're with me, all right. All right, so now we're moving into adulthood, right? So in addition to developing shame about aspects of yourself because of a parent or a caregiver, right? Or even perhaps a kid in school, right, being bullied, maybe it's not acceptable to be smart in school, or it's not acceptable to dress a certain way or to be too tall or whatever, right? This common shame triggers that happen in adulthood too, right? So for women, right, this common ones, not for everybody, but for a lot of women, right? So it's about trying to do it all, be the super mom, doing work, doing motherhood, doing, being thin and attractive, and doing it all without even looking like you're putting much effort into it. And when you feel like you're failing at that, or you're not measuring up in some way, it's a trigger for shame for a lot of people. Sometimes it even has to do with aging, right? You feel like I'm not the woman I used to be, and there's something wrong with me because society says it's only good if you're young and attractive, right? So that could play into a lot of women's mentality, especially from the media. Even just common things like having a physical health problem or a mental health problem or having trauma issues to deal with can kind of trigger shame, right? So a lot of those things are common for women. Okay, common shame triggers for men. In a general category, it's kind of like if someone ever told a man or a guy, be a man, right? What usually comes to mind? Okay, we got to be tough. We can't show too many feelings. We got to have sexual conquests. We got to, dominate women. Or, there's different things that are quote unquote socially acceptable for a man. You got to like sports, right? And if you don't fit that narrow category, you end up being called gay. You end up being called a faggot. You're shamed for not being man enough. And that happens throughout school for guys and even beyond, right? That they're always having this audience of other males judging them for not being man enough. Some of the guys I work with say, well, they'll pull your man card, that it's always something that you're proving. It's not like they just look at you and say, yeah, you're a man. It's like something you have to keep showing over and over again. And when you don't, you show weakness, it's easy for other people to shame you, okay? So in addition to all the other childhood stuff, this is common for men, all right? So ladies out there, if you didn't know that, now you know, okay? All right. All right, so how do you identify your triggers for shame? All right, so in addition to getting some ideas from what I was just telling you about, try to answer these sentences here, fill in the blanks, okay? So write this down. You can pause the video if you need to. So basically, if you could fill in, I want to be perceived as blank, 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 right? And I do not want to be perceived as blank, 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 okay? And see what comes up for you, right? So let's say you want to be perceived as attractive, as smart, as interesting, as kind. Okay, that's fine. I do not want to be perceived as vulnerable, as weak, as mentally ill, as addicted, as this, as that. Okay, right, whatever happens to be for you. But write those down so you're clear about what your triggers are, right? Because with more awareness of what your triggers are, you can have more power to deal with them, okay? All right, so shame is also often not coming just by itself. A lot of times it's paired up with other emotions, right? So we have to be aware of that. And sometimes we recognize the other emotions more and we neglect the shame that's underneath it. And because the shame is so painful that it gets buried by other stuff, okay? So shame could be paired with fear because there's a fear of being exposed and rejected, right? There's a fear that people are going to see those dirty things about me that I want to hide. And once they see them, I'm afraid that they're going to reject me for it. Okay, see how that goes together? Anger, that could work two ways. One, anger can cover up shame. This is especially true for men, right? Guys with an anger problem, chances are they also have a shame problem. Okay, but it's more socially acceptable to be angry. And it also makes you feel more powerful when you're angry, right? So it's a defense against shame. Like if someone humiliates you, you might be like, F you, rather than be like crawling down in shame, right? People flip around and get really pissed off. That could be an automatic reaction, okay? Other times, if it's more overt shame, the shame might prevent you from becoming angry. Like, so let's say you're a kid again, right? And you have a really dominant, angry parent who's, possibly abusive to you. And you might be furious at the way that parent's treating you. But if you were to dare express your anger to that parent, you get your butt whooped, right? So you've learned to kind of withdraw and appease and, make yourself small, and that's safer than exploding with that anger that's deep inside. So the shame could cover over the anger, okay? All right, so there's also a lot of times a feeling of emptiness. Why? Because the shame is related to a freeze and collapse response. And when you're collapsed, you feel kind of numb and dead inside, right? Almost like you're playing dead so that another animal won't eat you, or you're preparing yourself for attack and you don't want to feel the pain, right? So that's very tied into emptiness, okay? Also, depression or hopelessness, right? You could feel sad and depressed and also shameful at the same time. When you feel like my life is never going to get better because there's something wrong with me, I'm never going to make it happen, it's all linked up together, okay? So important to be mindful of what else could I be feeling too, because it's often a blend, all right? Okay, so I love this thing, it's body map of emotions. It's on a Google image search. You could look it up too. So I boxed around shame, which is on the bottom toward the right. So the orangey yellow colors are signs of heat, okay? And the blue and black colors are signs of coolness. So let's look at what happens with shame. So ever feel like your cheeks flush because you're embarrassed, right, or shamed? That's what's going on. Look at the cheeks are the brightest part, okay, in that picture. You also have some activations, some, in your chest and in your head, right? You feel the heat there, but your limbs are dead, okay? So you're not fighting, you're not running away, you're feeling in a collapsed state. So the parts of you that are mobile are not really getting all the heat and the activation. Okay, so that's why it's related to that collapse state, right? So you could feel a little revved up inside, but also collapsed at the same time. So the revved up is that heat here, the collapsed is the limbs being, cut off. All right, next. Okay, so shame-driven action. So like, what does shame make you feel like doing? So one of the things is to move away. There's different shame-driven actions, by the way. We're gonna go through a few. So you wanna just crawl into a hole and die, pretty much, right? You don't want people to see you. You might cover your face. You might want to not look at the person because you don't want them, it's hard to look them in the eye. You might avoid eye contact. You literally might physically avoid the person, like try to walk at the other side of the street or the hallway. You might hide by keeping secrets because you're so ashamed of certain parts of you, right? So that's a common response. The problem is if you're so used to avoiding and moving away, you might be, being super cautious, and you might avoid people that actually would be kind to you, right? So I've heard that, if, let's say, you have a pattern of avoiding eye contact because you're ashamed of looking at someone in the eye because you don't want them to see you and you don't want to see them, right? Because you're afraid of what you'll see in their eyes reflected back to you. But sometimes if you don't look someone in the eye, you won't see that they're looking back to you with kind and compassionate eyes, or a look on their face that's showing concern or caring. And so you're missing out on the people that may actually care because you're just assuming that everybody's going to be the kind of person that's going to, be a threat to you. All right. So we got to think about that a little bit, right? Let that swirl around a little bit. Okay. Also, it's a moving against, a fight reaction. So remember we talked about anger being one of the emotions that can cover over shame, right? So if I'm more in an anger mode because of my shame, I could come across as more grandiose. They say for men especially that, grandiosity is more apparent, but the shame is kind of hidden, right? So it might come more across as being contemptuous toward other people. So like on the picture on the left, the guy on the left is yelling at the guy on the right. So maybe, they're in a work situation and he thinks the guy is a vulnerable little piece of crap, right? But he's the one who feels like a vulnerable piece of crap. He's projecting his shame onto the other guy, and then he's attacking it with his fight parts, right? So this is like a total projection scenario, okay? If you want to learn more about projection, watch my video, okay? And this also happens in abusive relationships. So sometimes, even though, let's say there's a man who's really abusive and kind of like a monster in the relationship, deep down he might feel really insecure, So he's seeing the insecurity in his wife, and he's attacking her instead of attacking the shame in himself. or dealing with the shame in himself, okay? On the other hand, the fight response could be directed inward, right? Within ourselves. So we have inner parts, right? So we could have a fight part attacking our shame part within ourselves. So that manifests as negative self-talk, as self-injury, and other destructive behaviors, okay? And this is kind of related to the inner critic, okay? And you can check out my video about that if you want to. Okay, next. Another shame-driven action is to actually move toward, okay? So this is related to what I was saying before about the appease and please response, okay? So let's say, all right, we're back at childhood. We have this, difficult parent, abusive parent, maybe an angry parent, and we have to walk on eggshells and try not to upset that person. We might do everything to be a good little girl or a good little boy just to make the parent happy, right? I'm going to just try to do what I'm told, be quiet, anticipate your needs, try to clean up before you ask me to, because that's the way I'm going to maintain a relationship where you could still take care of me. Because I'm a kid and I can't take care of myself. I need you, even though you're abusive, okay? So it's like, if I could be perfect and just be who they want me to be, I'll be okay. That's kind of the rationale. Okay, other things we might do is to overcompensate. So if I'm thinking thoughts like, I'm not good enough, or there's something wrong with me, or I'm never going to measure up, I might overcompensate by trying to be perfect and do it all as good as possible or perfectly, and take on more and more and more just to prove to myself and other people that I'm good enough and worthy. Okay, so like the woman in the picture, like she's trying to juggle it all. And sometimes we could kill ourselves trying to like take on way too much, right? Instead of just pacing ourselves. But it comes from that deep, shameful insecurity. Okay, so negative impact of shame. All right, shame is one of the most destructive emotions that we have, okay? Shame is associated with aggression or violence, right? So if it flips into anger, especially, blaming and judging, another form of that fight part of ourselves, okay? We're projecting our shame onto others, and then we're blaming and judging others for having it, or blaming and judging ourselves too. Self-injury and suicide, right? So if I feel like I'm a terrible person, sometimes I try to kill off or hurt that bad part of myself. Instead of working toward accepting it, I'm trying to like literally cut it out, right? Addictions, because shame is so painful, I might medicate the feeling of shame by using drugs and alcohol or engaging in other types of addictive behaviors, okay? Even eating disorders, same kind of thing. We're also, it impacts our relationships, as you can imagine, right? So we're much less able to receive empathy, which would actually help heal our shame. And why don't we receive it? Because we feel like we don't deserve it. So even when people are trying to be empathic toward us, it's very hard for us to take it in. So that becomes an issue, right? We end up self-sabotaging, okay? Because we don't feel like we deserve success. We feel like, there's something wrong with me and I don't even deserve to do well, right? So self-sabotage prevents us from, making progress. We might get into perfectionism because, like, again, if I'm just good enough, then maybe people will like me or I'll be okay. And unfortunately, for treatment issues, right, you're less open to learning, changing, and problem solving. So that's a big issue if you're trying to work on this, right? So what do we do, right? Okay, so I'm going to talk about what are some things we could do. So shame resilience, right? So resilience basically means to bounce back from adversity, right? So if you're dealt a difficult hand, it's like a way to kind of move past it and overcome it, okay? So we're going to teach you how to move past and overcome your shame, some techniques. Okay, so here's a metaphor, all right? So think about like those mossy rocks, right? So in order for moss to grow, it needs a lot of dampness and darkness and shade, okay? So shame, in a similar way, grows in our own personal darkness, right? When we shield certain secrets about ourselves and we keep them to ourselves because we're afraid to share, it fuels the shame, okay? So shame grows in shadows and secrecy, okay? However, when you shine a light on the moss dies off, right? In sunshine, it doesn't grow well. So the rocks would just be like, just bare rocks, okay? Similarly, we shine a light on our shame by talking about it, by giving it empathy and acceptance and looking at it. the shame starts to die off. Okay? So it takes courage to do that, but it's an important step to overcoming shame. You're never going to heal the shame in secret. Okay? All right. So, okay. Here again, re-emphasize some more. So shame is about isolation, right? So the problems we have when we're shameful makes us feel unique and terrible, and we take things personally, and we feel like it's all our fault and all that stuff. I'm not worthy of connection. Shame resilience, we need connection to heal it. Like I said earlier, if you remember, shame starts in a relationship, and it can be healed in a relationship. Okay? So when we make an empathic connection with somebody that we could share with, and they could hear the shameful things that we feel, and they give us empathy, it helps to put our problems in perspective. It makes us realize we're not alone. And sometimes it makes it seem more normal, like it's not as bad as I thought. And that's so important in overcoming shame. Okay, that's why group therapy is helpful. That's why 12 steps are helpful. That's why therapy is helpful. Okay, but however you need to make that connection, it's really important to make that connection. Okay, so basically share the shame with someone you trust. Okay, whoever that happens to be for you. You have to speak out your shame, not just hide your shame. Okay, so empathy and compassion. So let's do a review of this. Okay, so empathy literally means to feel with. So you hopefully will find someone who could feel with you that shame, that could kind of intuitively grasp what you're getting at, and feel, kind of feel a little bit of it and communicate back to you, what that means, and kind of show you that they get it. Okay, compassion is kind of similar. It literally means to suffer together, right? So when someone's willing to get down the trenches with you and suffer a little with you and feel that shame with you and kind of understand your pain, that's compassion, okay? There's also self-empathy and self-compassion, doing these things for yourself. Okay, so the process of empathy, Brene Brown talks about, has courage, compassion, and connection, 3 C's, right? So we need courage to share our story first in order to get the empathy we're craving, right? Because especially if it's something you've kept to yourself for a long time, it takes a little courage to put it out there, right? And to be vulnerable. Compassion, right? So we're trying to receive compassion from others, let it in, let it soak into us and not just brush it off. And also give ourselves self-compassion when possible. So self-compassion has 3 components: mindfulness, being aware of the shame; kindness, being kind to ourselves in our state of suffering; and common humanity, realizing you're not the only one going through this, right? Because you see how this works with the shame, right? Very helpful. And of course, connection, right? So when we feel seen and heard and valued by other people, it helps the shame to dissipate. Okay, so courage, compassion, and connection. Okay, it's also important to gain perspective, right? Because when we're stuck in our head feeling shameful, we're losing perspective, right? It's staying in our head's a dangerous neighborhood. It's not a good place to stay in alone, right? Like they say. So we need to contextualize. So understand where the shame came from, right? It gives you perspective to know, like, this came from my parents acting this way toward me. And why did they act that way? Probably because they were treated that similar way and they were just doing what they knew, right? Maybe it came from society and some kind of societal messages about how we're supposed to look and how we're supposed to act and what a real man does and what a real woman does and what's acceptable, right? So shame can come in a societal way, right? Even politically, like there's certain political things that, like, let's say for a long time, it was against the law to serve in the military if you were gay, right? Politically, because of that law, people were shamed for being in the military if they were LGBT, right? So sometimes it's even political reasons, okay? Normalizing, realizing again, you're not the only one with this problem, and demystifying. So when you gain some of these insights, it's good to share it with others, right? Maybe other people that will understand and kind of reinforce the perspective that you're already gaining. Okay, here's another really key thing, right? And I was kind of talking about it before, but this is going to really reinforce it. So you got to remember that the shame is an adaptive mechanism. It was a survival response that you had, that you developed probably early on. And it's very hard for your system to let go of something that was adaptive and a survival mechanism. right? So, but remembering how it's adaptive helped you to validate yourself in that response, right? So pause the video if you have to, write these questions down and try to answer them, okay? So how did blank help you to survive? So like your shame, your thought patterns, how did it help you to think I'm no good? How did it help you to think I'm ugly? How did it help you to think I'm worthless? Maybe it kept you small. Maybe it helped you to survive, right? How did shame have a purpose? How did it help you to be hidden? What kind of behaviors did it make you do that helped you? How is it adapted to feel worthless and undeserving, right? How did it keep you small? And maybe that was better. How did shame produce the behavior that was the best possible adaptation in an unsafe world? All right, so reflect on these for your personal experience so you can really integrate how this fits into your life. Okay, and think about how your inner critic, so to speak, is trying to help you, right? It was just trying to tell you these negative messages because it was supposed to keep you small and safe, okay? And in a certain kind of comfort zone that would protect you. So even though it's painful now to hear negative messages in your head, at one time it made sense. Now we still have to work with it, and but it did make sense. So this helps with the validation. Okay, so another thing we could do is be mindful of our shame. So don't get too wrapped up in it. We could actually step back from a place of our wise mind and observe the shame. What is it doing in my body? You know, where am I feeling the heat and the cold? Where am I feeling deadness inside? Where am I feeling tingling? Just break it down. What's happening in my body? Drop below the thoughts. You could also say, oh, gee, that's interesting. That sounds like a shame thought. Where did that come from? Like, look at it with a sense of curiosity rather than fear, right? We could fear our shame state because it's so unpleasant, but if we're curious about it, it opens us up a little bit. Well, that's interesting. Why am I thinking I'm worthless again? Maybe that's one of my shame things, okay? So try that a little bit. Or if you notice yourself hunching your shoulders or avoiding eye contact, maybe you're embodying a memory that kind of was a shame protective mechanism, right? Gee, I wonder why I'm doing that now. Maybe I felt some kind of threat in my environment that reminded me of something from the past. That's interesting, right? So take a little curiosity into it. And finally, really work on self-acceptance, okay? So you don't have to love every part of yourself to try to accept all the different parts of yourself, okay? Every part is there as an important ingredient that makes you you. And everything you experience is something that's normal and human. And there's nothing in your repertoire that's not okay. Okay? It's all just part of the journey and all part of what we could, use to help move us to the next level of our learning and our personal growth. Okay? So every part of us is just, a pain child crying out for help, right? Even, that's all it really is. Like we want to give all the different painful parts a sense of love and compassion and empathy. Okay? And be your own best friend. Instead of being your own worst critic, we got to be on our own side. Okay? And just wanted to reiterate again, so Brene Brown's excellent if you want to learn more about shame. Her books are really good too. She has videos on YouTube. And Janina Fisher, she's a trauma therapist, does things called with somatic experiencing. And she's also very good, talks about different parts of self and shame and things like that. Okay, so just wanted to share that with you guys. And that's it for now. So I hope that was a little entertaining and educational for you. And I hope it helps with your own shame issues. So I hope that works. And I'll see you soon. All right. Bye, guys.